In this session, we're going to answer 4 questions. First of all, we're going to answer, where did the sons of Adam and Eve find their wives? Secondly, did the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve commit incest? Thirdly, was Abraham married to his sister? And lastly, how long were Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden? In this session, we'll show you biblical proof, scientific proof, and proof from another reliable third source that the sons of Adam and Eve did indeed marry their biological sisters. Now, I've spoken to people before that they say, well, maybe Adam and Eve were the first people that God created, but maybe He created other people, and Adam and Eve perhaps were just the lineage of the Jews. We're going to see from these 3 sources that we've just outlined here that is wrong teaching, that is bad teaching, that is totally incorrect. We're also going to show scientific proof that that's just not possible. Yes, we would call it incest today. However, please keep in mind that there were no laws declared by God nor by man at that time which made it wrong to practice what we would refer to as incest today. In fact, Abraham married his half-sister. They had the same biological father, but they had different mothers. We find this information in Genesis, the 20th chapter and the 12th verse. We also see that the repopulation of the world after the flood had to be through incest, what we would refer to as incest today, because only Noah, his wife, and their sons, and the wives of those sons, were allowed to be on the ark. We find that information in Genesis 6 and 18, the people that God allowed to go on the ark. This means that the world was totally repopulated by Noah's family with a maximum distance in relationship as being first cousins. So the grandchildren of Adam and Eve, of Noah and his wife, those grandchildren had to marry each other in order to repopulate the world. It was not until the days of Moses that it became unlawful for a person to marry a relative. So in the days of Adam and Eve, and again in the days of Abraham and Sarah, it was both socially acceptable and morally acceptable for them to do the things that they were doing, what we would refer to as incest today. If you wish to study the laws that were given to Moses that made it illegal under God's law for people to intermarry and practice incest, you'll find those in Deuteronomy, the 27th chapter, and then again also in Leviticus, the 18th chapter. And while you're there in the 18th chapter of Leviticus, you might want to take a look at verse 22, because it is here where God made it against God's law for people to practice homosexuality. Also, I've given a web address here that you might want to take a look at, because I found it interesting when I looked at it, because it breaks down the incest relationships that are outlined in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, which ones were forbidden under God's law, and it makes it a little bit easier to have a better visual presentation of it. The main reason why God made it a sin to exercise sexual incest is obvious. It is because its offspring had an exceptionally high probability of having physical and or mental defects, as well as being able to ward off diseases. If 2 people which were not related to each other have an offspring, then 2 different sets of DNA are present, and the segment of DNA containing the, I shouldn't say recessive trait, but the undesirable trait, the sickly trait, it can then be rejected. In the case of incest, both parents will probably have the same genetic problems, though, so DNA does not have anything to choose from except a bad segment of DNA. God was fully aware of this situation when He created the laws of DNA at the time that He created all animal life and He created all human life. God knew this weakness. He knew this vulnerability, but it was not until the days of Moses that he made it illegal. So That's why I'm able to say that there probably were not the genetic defects at that time that are present today. In the early generations of mankind, incest was not forbidden because it was not a genetic problem. Early DNA may have not contained the many vulnerabilities that were present in today's DNA. I apologize for saying that twice. This is why it was perfectly acceptable in the days of Adam and Eve, and again in the days of Abraham and Sarah, and also in the days of Noah, for them to marry their siblings or other close relatives. In Genesis, we do not find out that explicitly find out that the sons married the daughters of one another. But it is implied because in Genesis 3:20 it says that Adam called his wife Eve, and being the mother of all living. So Eve is not the mother of all animals, but she was and she is the mother of all human beings. And we will look at scientific proof very shortly that confirms that validates that statement, that Eve is the mother of all living. So this is our biblical proof that those sons of Adam and Eve did indeed marry their own sisters, because if Eve is the mother of all living, then that was the only choice that they had. If there was another woman alive at the same time of Eve, then she would not be the mother of all living. She would be only the partial mother of all living. So even though the Bible does not explicitly tell us where the sons of Adam and Eve found their wives to marry, the book of Jubilees is very clear on the matter. Now, please note that the book of Jubilees is not, I repeat, is not in the Bible. It contains 50 chapters and is sometimes referred to as the Lesser Genesis. I like to read the book of Jubilees because in some areas of detail, Jubilees will go into deeper detail and not just merely scratch the surface as it does in the book of Genesis. So in the book of Jubilees, we find the following information, and please note that I've used the word marries here, but the book of Jubilees, I don't think it ever says marries or married, but it'll use phraseology like to be his wife, something along those lines instead of the word marries or married. So in the book of Jubilees, chapter 4, we find that Cain is born somewhere in the year 64 to 70. And then Abel is born in 71 through 77. Awan, the first daughter, we find the name of that daughter here in the book of Jubilees, and she was born sometimes between 78 and 84. And then Cain kills Abel in the year 99 to 105. Seth is conceived by Adam and Eve in the year 130. And then we find the second daughter, Azura, is conceived in the year 134 through 140. And then Cain marries Awan, his sister. So we see that explicitly called out here that the son of Adam and Eve, Cain, married the daughter of Adam and Eve, Awan, his sister. Then Enoch is conceived by Cain and Awan in the year 190 through 196. Jubilee 4 and 10 tells us something else that's interesting. It says that Adam and Eve have 9 sons. Now, I don't know if it's 9 sons inclusive of the ones that we've already listed, or it's in addition to the sons that we've listed. But at any rate, they had at least 9 sons, and probably more than that. It seems to me that this was in addition to the sons that we already have listed that were born. And then we find that Seth marries Azura in the year 225 to 231. So here we have another son of Adam and Eve marrying another daughter of Adam and Eve. I've stopped listing the incestuous relationships here, but the book of Jubilee continues on to list them. But I have stopped at chapter 4 and verse 11 if you wish to continue on to study those. So we have looked at the proof in the Bible, and we've looked at proof from another source, the other source being the book of Jubilees. But what scientific proof do we have that they they actually practiced incest back in those days. And we actually have two pieces of scientific proofs. The first proof is mitochondrial Eve, and I may be mispronouncing that. I'm not a biologist or an expert on the matter, but mitochondrial Eve is a process whereby scientists are able to use DNA to trace all human beings back to one common woman or one common mother. This method is run from generation to generation using only the hereditary lineage of the mothers. Our second scientific proof is very similar to the first, but it is totally different. Our second proof is Y-chromosomal Adam. This process uses Y chromosomes DNA sequences to trace the paternal lineage. So it's only checking from one father or one dad to the next generation of fathers. So that's why I say that we actually have two different pieces of scientific proof, but they are similar to one another in the type of proof that they are. Initially, evolutionists were saying that mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosomal Adam were separated by thousands of years, but later studies placed them in the same region at about the same time. Just what the Bible had always said, that Adam and Eve actually lived together. Now, this statement is almost humorous because, of course, there had to be a man and there had to be a woman living in close proximity of one another at the same time in order for children to be born. And so this is what the Bible had said all along, but it took thousands of years for the evolutionists to catch, the science to catch up. Evolutionists also made the statement that there may have been 10,000 other women alive at the same time as mitochondrial Eve, but that their DNA did not survive over time. So their lineage got killed off, and only the DNA from Eve survived. Or said another way, their descendants were all killed off. Wow, that was close. Just think, if 10,000 women were alive and only one managed to survive over a period of time, almost the whole existence of mankind was destroyed. Had that one woman out of 10,001, had she been destroyed, then the human race would have ceased to exist. Wow, that was super close, wasn't it? And likewise, they said the same thing about Y-chromosomal Adam. The evolutionists again made the statement that there may have been 10,000 fathers alive at the same time as this Adam, but their DNA did not survive over time. Or said another way, their descendants were all killed off. Wow, once again, that was close. There were 10,000 fathers alive at the same time, but they all died. Only Adam survived. If he had been killed, then once again the entire human race would not even exist today. The larger the evolution makes the imaginary number, this 10,000 count number, the more miraculous the outcome becomes. If they had said there may have been 1 million, which they're just pulling the number out of the air, if they said there's 1 million fathers alive at the same time, then that makes it even more absurd, because 1 million people now have gotten killed off and only one survived. And likewise again with the mother, the lineage of the mother. No scientific proof that there were 10,000 women or 10,000 men alive at the time of our one ancestral father or our one ancestral mother. But that is what they choose to believe. And belief is always a choice, my friend. I've created a lesson on it that says that you choose what you believe and you choose what you will not believe. So the evolutionist chooses to believe that what happened. But the book of Genesis and the book of Jubilees has outlined the facts thousands of years before the theory of evolution was ever even fabricated. So we've answered the question, where did the sons of Adam and Eve find their wives? They married they married brothers and sisters. Did the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve commit incest? Well, yes, they did, but incest was not illegal by the laws of God nor by the laws of man at that time. Was Abraham married to his sister? Well, he was married to his half-sister, actually, not his full sister. And then lastly, we have not answered this question: how long were Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden? And to this question, we really do not know the answer, but I don't think that they were in the garden very long. And the reason I say this is because God told them to be fruitful and multiply before they ever committed the original sin. In Genesis 1:27, it says, God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. So we find this statement, this commandment for them to be fruitful and multiply in Genesis, the first chapter. But the fall of Adam and Eve did not happen until the third chapter. So they could have had children, but they did not. Between the first chapter of Genesis and the third chapter of Genesis, they were capable of procreating life because they were given the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. But they were not exiled from or expelled from the garden until the third chapter of Genesis. So I really don't believe they were in the garden very long, because they never conceived any children before being forced out of the Garden of Eden. My friends, I hope this lesson has strengthened your faith in God, because we have showed you scientific truth that the written Word of God has truthfully shown us the origin of all human beings thousands of years before science caught up with these facts. This knowledge should give us all just a shadow of the awesomeness of our Almighty God. He not only understands DNA and genetics, but He designed the very laws by which they are commanded to operate. His intellect and His ability is beyond anything that you or I can even comprehend. Praises be unto the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made.